Good evening, everybody. We are now recording. Tonight, we are meeting with Carolina Jayaram. Carolina, welcome to, I want to call it a show because everybody here is so damn entertaining, but it's really not. This is a discussion. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Excellent. I'm really, I drove 500 miles to be here tonight to be with all of you. You'd think I could have done it somewhere on the internet, but here I am. I'm real curious with everybody about where they were raised and how they got from, well, let me ask you initially, did you think when you grew up that you were going to be an artist when you were a little kid?
No, I did not. I was creative in other ways, but in literature, yes. Writing, yes, but not in visual arts.
Well, I think you're highly creative. All right, so where were you raised and how did you get from there to here in 5 or 6 minutes?
I was born in Spain and to Cuban parents who fled Cuba and went to Spain and lived in Spain till I was about 3 years old, then moved to the States and lived in a number of different places, but predominantly in South Florida. And then went to college in New York City and then went back to Miami and then have been now in Chicago for 5 years. That's the short version. I've lived in a lot of places in between.
That's short. All right, so high school was in South Florida.
Yes.
And college was where?
At the New School in New York.
All right, so there was some interest in art and culture when you went to college.
Yes, I was a poetry and writing major.
Fascinating. So there are not a whole lot of schools that enable you to be a poetry and writing major.
No, especially not one with those kind of teachers because they're all writers living in New York. So it was a great concentration of living poets.
And did you think you were going to earn a living as a poet? Was that your intent?
Not for long. I realized pretty quickly that wasn't going to happen. And I went to work right after school. I decided I wanted to be a food writer. So I went and got a culinary degree. And then ended up at Pan American Center, which is an international writers organization where I worked for a few years doing literary programming around the country. And that's when I decided I wanted to go to law school and basically run my own nonprofit. So that's how I was disavowed of being a poet in that way.
Did you go to law school?
I did. I did go to law school.
And did you finish that?
I did. And
I didn't know that at all.
I did.
That's fascinating. And did you practice law?
Not for very long. I knew that I wanted to do what I'm doing now. I founded my first organization, second semester of my first year of law school, an organization called LegalArt that's in Miami and is now called Cannonball and has just celebrated its 11th year. And
what was your intent with that? What did you do? What did it do? What was your relationship to it?
Well, it started because I was dating an artist at the time, and all of my friends in Miami were artists, and it was the first year. My first year of law school was actually the second year of Art Basel coming to Miami. And so suddenly a lot of Miami artists who'd never really gotten any recognition or much success were suddenly quite successful and getting a lot of attention. So we started it as a legal aid and professional development organization run out of with a partner. She and I ran it the second semester of that first year of law school. And it was based on the premise of bartering artwork for legal services. And it was very successful. Over the years, we've helped hundreds of artists and small arts organizations in Miami with artists bartering, essentially, artwork for legal services. And then it's really evolved from there, which is why we decided, I'm still on the board, to change the name. And now we have a building in downtown Miami near the new art museum. And we have a residency program there for 7 artists and a lot of other programming.
Wow. All right. So I don't know what year of art Miami Basel this is. Is this the 10th year? They skipped it somewhere. They postponed.
It's around 10 or 11. Yeah.
So all right. So how long did you do? I mean, you've outgrown. I don't know if that's fair. You've outgrown a number of organizations. You've progressed. You've done some significant. You've helped a bunch of organizations significantly. How long were you working with Cannonball?
I was there until 2009.
That's like 5 years?
First 5 or 6 years, yeah.
And then what came after that?
Then I moved to Chicago, and I spent a little under a year doing arts education advocacy policy work. I tried to put on my legal hat again and worked for an organization called Arts Alliance Illinois, which I'm sure you're familiar with here in Chicago, and didn't really like that work. I spent a lot of time in Springfield and thought that I would dip a toe into policy work and didn't really enjoy that, and wanted to be really back in the more creative helm of being an ED. So then was going to start an organization again, much like LegalArt in Miami, but was talked into trying to revive and breathe new life into Chicago Artists Coalition. So that's how I ended up there.
Let's talk about that for a moment, because to my mind, the Chicago Artists Coalition, previous to your arrival, was a fairly staid organization with a tainted history. And you made it exceptionally vibrant, and you took something that had been in a rut for decades and made it, a flower. You created a garden. You did a beautiful thing. Were you recruited? Did they know that you were exceptional, or did you apply for the job and nobody else wanted it? Where does the truth lie?
It's a little of both. I was actually offered that job when I moved to Chicago at the same time I was offered the job at the Arts Alliance. That was the first time I was offered the job at the CIC, and I didn't take it because I had felt a little burned out by being ED for so long and having to sort of wear all the hats that anyone who's run a small arts organization understands. And then they brought in somebody from Seattle who, when faced with the hemorrhaging organization that was CAC, ran for the hills about a year later. And so it became open again. And it was Barbara Kennan, who is been here at the Department of Cultural Affairs here in Chicago for many, many years, is an old friend of mine from when I was in Miami, along with the then Deputy Commissioner of Cultural Affairs, Janet Carl Smith. So the two of them really recruited me, knowing that I was not happy at the Arts Alliance and was looking to run something again. And I think in their wisdom, by coming after me, someone who had no history in Chicago, or very little history at that point, was pretty smart, because I didn't have any of these preconceived notions about what CAC was and the baggage that it carried. And I was really just kind of interested in the challenge of turning it around. But, to the credit of many, many people, it was turned around very quickly because so many people wanted it to succeed and didn't want to see that brand, that organization completely die. It was very close to dying, but it was not yet dead.
Well, that's really polite of you, but I don't think that's really the truth. I think it took someone with an exceptional vision in order to, step up to the helm and, drive this pilotless ship I think other talented people had attempted to do things before and wanted to make it more than it was, and probably didn't have the propelling vision that you did.
Well, it is convincing people. I mean, that's a very big part of this kind of work is the sale. It's really selling the idea and the dream of what something can become. It's almost like people who renovate houses that are complete, in complete disarray when you see them, and they have to see something that the other person doesn't see. That's basically the role that I play.
Yeah, well, obviously you're a good team player and you're not taking sufficient credit, and I'm going to force you to. So when... was your vision realized? No. Did you have a vision when you stepped into the job, or to what extent did the vision grow on the job?
I did have a vision that I had brought largely with me from Miami, which was a belief that artists tend to underestimate their ability, and my belief that I am able to convince them that they are capable of more than they give themselves credit for. And it's a very simple premise, but one that I sort of have built all of these organizations on, and a real understanding that success is very different for each individual artist. And so creating programming that's overly generalized is a mistake. And I think that organizations that do that are often they don't have a very deep impact. So I went in with a vision of tried to create some programming. I mean, the organization at that time had no programming. It had a newspaper that was very active.
Right, you're totally correct.
Yeah.
Define programming.
So programming, to me, the experience that I brought to the table had to do with very sort of traditional professional development, much of what I know that you teach here. So, marketing practice, business planning, financial, acumen, how to build your resume, how to build a website, like all of those things. And the thing with CAC was, at the time, it was a membership organization and had a fairly large number of still active dues paying members, but they were not actively involved. They were really, it was like a subscription to this newspaper. That was the extent of their involvement in the organization. And it was, and let's say, like, demographically, it was largely very white, very much of, a generation that had been with the organization since the 70s. So was, tending to be in the 50s, 60s, 70s range. And so their needs as artist population and as members was one thing. So I had to get to know that membership. And then I wanted to grow the membership. And so my vision at the beginning was really just understanding what we had. So the first thing we did was get a grant to do a community-wide assessment and do a lot of surveying of the members that we had, and then of all of the other artists who were not active in CAC, to find out why. Because what was interesting was that all the years that CAC had ceased to be impactful or effective in Chicago, no other organization had sort of stepped in to fill that void. So, it was interesting to me that all of these artists were living in Chicago, and yet these services largely weren't really available to them from anyone else. A little bit from the city. You hadn't yet really started this program, and obviously there was a need for this kind of thing. So that's where it started, and then it really evolved from there.
Okay, so let's talk. Let me ask you, do we want to talk about what artists need and how we address that, or do we want to talk about where you've gone since the Chicago Artists Coalition? How do we want to go from one subject to the next?
It depends on, kind of the trajectory of this, because if you want to talk more about vision and how it relates to artists taking risks, which is something I think that I have in common with a lot of artists.
All right, well, hold on. I know what I want to do.
Okay.
How long did you work for the Chicago Artists Coalition?
3.5 years.
Did it come to a logical conclusion? Had you been there enough when you entertained new notions? Oh, time out. Let's talk about, what are you doing now?
Now I'm the CEO of a national foundation called the United States Artists.
And do you feel like you finished your work at the Chicago Artists Coalition, or it was never finished and somebody else steps in and it's appropriate after 3.5 years for somebody else's vision? Where were your emotions with departing that organization?
I think in retrospect, I was ready, but I wasn't, I wouldn't have left. This opportunity really came to me. I didn't really go looking for it. And when it came to me, I stood for a long time. And at first I tried to hold on to CAC, and I had this kind of crazy vision of perhaps merging the two organizations, because I didn't want to yet let go of CAC. And I had just undertaken some really big projects that I was very excited about. But then in retrospect, I realized that to make the leap from, I started the organization, let's say at zero, actually negative, because it was in the red, the organization. And I took it to about a $750,000 budget. And in order to make the leap to well over $1 million, for anyone who's run organizations, that's a big leap in a lot of ways. And to make that leap, I needed to make changes that weren't going to happen for a while. And I was definitely growing frustrated. So when this opportunity came along, I did feel like it was time, because I see now, after now being my third major organization, that I think I'm better as a builder, not so much a sustainer. And I got CAC to the point where I was building. I built a lot of new things. And then my instinct is just to keep building. And that's not necessarily the best thing for the organization anymore. And now I know, I'm happy that now there's a new leader in place who, it seems, is more of a sustainer. And I think that'll be very good for the long-term health of the organization.
Do you have a residual involvement with the Chicago Artists Coalition?
Well, it's funny, I was in a very good position with the board. Obviously, they didn't really want to see me go when I left. And so a couple board members said, well, do you want to be on the board? I said, well, that's absolutely the worst thing you can do to the new executive director. So no, I'm not involved in any official way, but she did reach out to me, the new ED. She was just named last week, and I told her I'm here for her, anything she needs. Maybe in a couple of years, I would go onto the board if that felt right, but I don't want to get in her way. And I think that given my reputation and that I kind of put the organization back on the map, it's a lot for her to to sort of, I don't want to overshadow it.
I think that's wise on your part. I'm not sure that was my initial instinct, but I think that's wise. All right, so now you are with United States Artists.
Yes.
What do they do?
So United States Artists is an amazing, amazing organization, has never been really in any kind of trouble the way that CAC is. So it's, for me, not a turnaround situation, but it is a growth situation, which is exciting. It was started 7 years ago, almost 8 years ago, by 4 women presidents of 4 major American foundations. So the presidents of Ford, Rasmussen, Prudential, and Rockefeller foundations. And it was started in direct response to the severe cuts by the NEA in the 90s of direct and unencumbered support awards to individual American artists.
I want to interrupt because we have people who are not from the United States who may not know what NEA is.
That's the National Endowment for the Arts. And
which is a federal government organization that gives money to arts organizations and not to individual artists, because the Congress in their infinite wisdom thought that artists were too flaky to give money to directly.
Yeah.
Okay, so the NEA had been cutting back.
The NEA cut a lot of the money that individual American artists had been getting. And I mean, never had so many gotten them anyway, but a lot did. There was a lot of money that was there at one time that was cut. And there was a bunch of there was a study done by a group called the Urban Institute, that's like a policy institute that does studies on all kinds of things. And they had studied what were the biggest obstacles to American artists. It was a massive study called Investing in Creativity that really changed the field, especially among a lot of foundations in the United States. It's a really interesting study. If any of you want to look it up, it had a massive impact across the country on organizations and the way that they operate and the kind of giving that they get. So in response to these 2 things mainly, and something that really interesting that came out of that study, that Urban Institute study, was a measurement that kind of shocked some of the foundation world, which was that among the thousands and thousands of people that they surveyed, what came out was that 96% of Americans value art, but only 26% of Americans value artists. And this incredible discrepancy really shocked them, and people sort of at the top of the foundation world. So this was in response to that, to saying we need to value artists as much or more than what they're creating and making. So it was started with a fund of about $27 million, with the very elegant and simple premise of giving 50, because of United States Artists, United States, $50,000 awards every year across 8 major disciplines. So it's visual, theater and performing arts, media, which includes video and radio, traditional and craft arts, literature, dance, architecture and design, visual, all the major sort of categories. And within each of those categories, there's a lot of subcategories. So we've been doing that award now for 7 years. We're about to announce our 7th group, and we'll just be over 400 artists and just over $20 million of investment. So I took over in February.
I'm sorry, you took over in February. So
yes.
The amount of money that's given away has grown.
No, it's just an accumulation. It's 20 million.
But it was 50 artists a year that got money previously, and now you said you're about to announce 400?
No, the total now will be 400.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. After 8 years.
And there have been a lot of collaborations. So the numbers are, they're a little, some years we have more individuals, even though it's only 50 awards. Yeah.
Wow. All right. Nestor asked an interesting clarification question. Are people nominated or do they apply?
Good question. It's by nomination only. And so we have a very rigorous process. If you go to our website, it's not a very good website. It's kind of tricky to find the fellows, but you can see them on the upper left-hand corner of the website. It says Meet the USA Fellows. And so every year, it's a painstakingly long process, and we spend all of our time looking for nominators all the time. But we look for nominators across all 50 states, across all 8 disciplines, very rural areas, very urban areas, and then about 300 nominators are invited each year. They each nominate 1 to 2 artists. Usually they nominate 1. And then all of those artists are contacted. They submit a very simple application with work samples. And then we bring in panels, expert panels, to meet. Right now we're in the middle of that panel process. So a panel meets for every one of the different categories. They make the selections, and then the board of directors meets. and they vote in the selections, and then they look at the field, because diversity is very important to us. Diversity across geography, diversity of age, diversity of gender, sexual orientation, cultural background, all of it. So they look at sort of the field and they see what's missing. You know, is it too heavy on men? Is it too heavy on trombone players, whatever have you, and then they kind of balance it out with the last 5. So it's a uniquely diverse, incredible group of makers from all parts of this country. And they're not all American born, I should say that too. There's a lot who are just, you know, residents of the United States. You just have to be a resident here. What
do you want to do with this organization? How do you want to, affect it, change it?
Yeah, it's very exciting because, you know, it was a very stable and respected organization when I came upon it. And I know that I was kind of a risky hire for them. You know, I think I'm significantly younger than most of the people that they were interviewing. And they could have gone a very safe route with somebody who's raised millions and millions of dollars, which I clearly have not, because I've never run an organization of this size. But they were looking for an entrepreneurial thinker, and they wanted to take what they had done, which is, you know, wonderful and had great impact, and bring it, you know, modernize it and add some more value for the artists. And they've let me be very clear with that. I hired an incredible team of people. I should say I also moved it from Los Angeles to Chicago. So I got to hire my team of people. And my goal, my vision, like you were asking me my vision before for CAC, my vision for this is really about enhancing the experience for the awardee. We call them fellows. So in the past, the fellow got this $50,000 check. That's fantastic. There's no strings attached. You can use it however you want. And then you were flown in to Los Angeles or wherever we had this very fancy red carpet kind of award ceremony. And then that was it. You kind of never heard from us again. And I wanted to change that. So I have a number of 3 big actual changes or additions, I should say, enhancements that I'm making to the award that will be, you know, trickled out starting next year, which I can talk about if you want me to. But
love to.
Okay.
Well, I want to do it briefly because you have some definite opinions what artists are great at and what artists are not so great at. I want to get to that.
Yeah, I'll be quick. And all of you, you know, if you start following us on Facebook, you can learn a lot more about what all these things are. We're quite active on social media. So the first is that instead of doing a one-off, one-night fancy award ceremony, that to me was a very big waste of money and resources, we're going to spend all that great money and bring all of the fellows here to the first time into Chicago in March for a 2-day conference. So all of this year's fellows, along with all the alumni in this region, which is about 34 in the Midwest, will be flown to Chicago. And then we'll have a lot of arts leaders and funders and great thinkers to have a wonderful 2-day conference. And a lot of great stuff is going to come out of that. And we're partnering with some residency programs so that artists who come and have great ideas can take them on to do great things. Because what's exciting to me about USA is that we are in a very unique position to bring together this very diverse group of artists. You know, but for us, is this great jazz drummer in New Orleans ever going to meet this great choreographer from Alaska? You know, they really would never meet each other, but for this opportunity, most likely they wouldn't. So that's one piece. And then the second is to partner with major industry events in all of our categories. So when the winners win, next year, for example, if you're a winner in media, we will partner with the Sundance Film Festival and you will take your film to Sundance to be screened at Sundance. If you're a visual artist, you will be brought to Chicago to do some kind of either panel discussion or exhibition, depending on what kind of work you do and what's appropriate, at Expo Chicago, which is our big art fair here in Chicago. So we have partners across the 8 disciplines like that. And then the third thing is that we're going to be doing a smaller award for emerging and under-recognized artists. And those will be nominated only by our alumni. So this is a really key way to get our alumni activated and involved. And what's really cool about that is that not only can we give an award to artists who would normally not be eligible for our award, but it will come with a mentorship piece. So the alumni fellow who is nominating will also have a plan for how to mentor this young or under-recognized artist. So that's all kind of being developed now.
That sounds really wonderful. I need to throw in here, just as an aside, that I work with TED Fellows, and a number of the TED Fellows are visual artists and artists in other media. And they have collaboratoriums that I find absolutely amazing. And there's a woman who heads up the TED Fellows program, Renee Friedman, who is Friedman with two E's, who is absolutely remarkable and loved by all the TED Fellows. And I'm sure that she would love to have her brain picked and share whatever kind of insights, etc.
Yeah, where is she based out of?
Phoenix.
Yeah, if you could make an introduction for me, that'd be great. Right now, I'm really just trying to research all the great convenings that are out there and you know, basically steal from everyone's good ideas, which is what I do all the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's a whole lot easier to steal than be creative, and frequently with theft, you can throw a couple of things together and create something that seems new and get credit, but really it's coming from somewhere else.
Right.
All right, so let's talk about artists. I mean, you've done all these things to assist artists in an array of disciplines. I mean, I see with TED Fellows, I'm shocked that TED Fellows are insecure. You know, there are like 20,000 people apply and 10 that are selected, and they feel like they're not worthy. And which tells me that all of us, it tells me that when someone pays us a compliment, it's much closer to the truth than our own self-impression. And that when someone is insulting to us, it's usually because they have a negative agenda and it's dismissible. So that all of us should be ratcheting up our self-impression at least 10%. What is it that you notice about artists? What should they be doing better in terms of themselves?
I would say, and this is another reason why I was really excited to come to work at USA, and it was something I was starting to do at CAC. It's a trend. It's not appropriate to every artist, but for those that it is, I think it's very exciting for artists to open up their worlds as much as possible in terms of especially discipline, and to either not necessarily collaborate with or work or even experiment in other disciplines, but to start to expose yourself to other disciplines in ways, because the brain is a muscle, you know, and I feel like if you're someone who doesn't follow dance and suddenly you go see this extraordinary dance performance, it's going to resonate with you in a different way than going to see yet another sculpture show if you're a sculptor. And it's kind of a way to wake up those senses in a way that, to me, was a very big, exciting piece of joining USA, is that I get to work across these disciplines and make some of these potential meetings and new collaborations happen. And I would just say that because I see that the interest in that from an audience perspective and from a marketing perspective, and not necessarily to be so market driven. I don't think that's appropriate for every artist to care so much about the money market part of it, but just in terms of how it can extend your practice. I think today there's just so much more access to these things, and so taking advantage of that access would be one thing I would advise artists to do in a very generalized sense. You know, that's not very specific to everyone, though.
I think that's true. What about geography? Do you think, what about where artists live? How much does that affect what they create? How much does traveling and experiencing these things elsewhere affect that?
Well, it's so interesting because it's like all of us and in all of these fields that we work in now, it's becoming less and less important where we actually live necessarily. I'm so exceedingly excited that I'm about to announce that the great artist Ann Hamilton is about to join our board. And she's a prior fellow. I don't know if you guys are familiar with her work, but she lived for a long time on the coast. She's from Ohio, and she's now back in Ohio. And I find it very interesting that she can have a very successful practice from Ohio, you know, and I'm seeing that more, you know, because artists are able to practice one place and get around the country for shows and other projects. But of course, that's not a reality for everyone. You know, not everyone has reached that level of success. But I do think there are certain communities that I'm finding to be very, very nurturing for artists in a way that the big cities have ceased to be in some ways. So some of these secondary cities, I would say, in the United States anyway, would be like Kansas City and Omaha, Nebraska. And I mean, I think Chicago is very supportive of artists, but certainly not as affordable as some of these other places, Cincinnati and Nashville. And, you know, I see a lot of more artists moving to these secondary cities because they're more affordable. And of course, for me, the great example is Detroit. I mean, that's where I'm telling every artist to move, because you can buy a house for like nothing. And there's a really amazing creative community there. And if you don't have to have a day job, it's a great place to live.
Yeah, Detroit's really tempting. It
Mm-hmm.
really is. What should more artists do?
I think, I think artists don't think of themselves enough as entrepreneurs. And I'm sure you guys have talked about this in a number of ways, but artists share so many characteristics with the most successful entrepreneurs in the world. You tend to be these great risk takers, and you tend to be very flexible, so that if you're doing something and it's not working, you're able to sort of change course and try something else, which is not true of most people and how they operate. Most people stick to one way, and it's very hard to have them change. And artists are usually pretty good at being flexible and very responsive to change and responsive to their environments. And so it's taking, I think, greater stock of those gifts and applying them to the more business side of your practice. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with a band that's very famous in Chicago named Wilco, but the lead singer is this guy named Jeff Tweedy, and he's been very successful in being a quite independent musician. And he did this interview, I want to say it was in Crane's, I think it was like a business kind of journal, and he was saying how frustrated he gets by musicians who are always crying about how they get screwed by the record companies or screwed by the management or all these things. And he said, if you can make it as a creative maker, if you're a good musician, then you have all the skills to be a successful business person in music. You just have to use those same creative skills to outthink all of these people. You're far more creative than they are. So stop letting everyone take advantage of you. And I thought that was an interesting point of view from someone like him to take. So I think, honing in on those entrepreneurial skills, I think and like you said about me earlier, really giving yourself credit for understanding this and finding your own way of doing it. And also just really protecting yourself. I think artists just don't protect themselves enough. They give away too much too soon in their careers.
I totally agree. I also think that artists are real prone to doing too much for too little. Like, if I have this exhibit at the bank and they don't pay me anything, it's okay, it's good for me.
Yeah,
or
absolutely.
To accept the BS that says, the opportunity is significant in lieu of compensation.
Every day they get asked that.
I'm going to paraphrase Barbara's question about what is the role of the artist in society?
I know it's a very simple answer, but I see the artist as the interpreter, and the one who can make people see something that is in front of them in a very different way. So that might be something that's very difficult to think about, like apartheid, or something that's very happy to think about, like parenthood, or something, totally, abstract and difficult completely to comprehend, like astrophysics. I mean, there's so many things in between, but I think that artists have an absolutely unique way of relaying information to the world. And it doesn't have to be kind of a cohesive of a thought like I just listed. It can be something that has no real basis in an idea in and of itself, but just making people think. I went this past weekend, I took my son, who's 3 years old, who I love watching him respond to art. I took him to see the Magritte show. There's a Magritte show here at the Art Institute. And I thought this is a perfect show to take a 3-year-old because, it's surrealism. Like, it's just such crazy stuff for him to see. And, I wasn't disappointed. I wasn't disappointed in his, something just fell, response, because it was, to me, it didn't really matter that he got what Magritte was trying to talk to us about, or say about surrealism, or say about anything else. It was each individual's idea of how that impacted him. And I think that's just really interesting that artists can do that on so many levels. Like, when the work is good, it will have an impact on any kind of audience, is what I'm trying to say. And so, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it does. But and if you guys have questions, you can start raising your hands now that we have the capability of doing that. I want to open it up to you momentarily.
I wanted to show you a book that I think I would recommend that artists read. It was helpful to me. I really liked it. I don't know if you can see it. It's called Hearts
Heart, Smarts, Guts, Luck.
Guts, and Luck. Have you read this?
I've not even heard of it.
Okay. This is out of the Harvard Business School. And it's out of the Harvard Business Review Press. It's by three guys, Anthony Tijan, Richard Harrington, and Sunyan Kisei, I guess. Those are the names there, if you can see that.
Yep.
To me, when I read this book, I was reading it as a more business entrepreneur, but every piece of this book made me think of artists. I thought that this was, I mean, they tell all of these stories, all of these anecdotal stories about, so like the chapter headings are Smarts, IQ is only the beginning, Guts, Luck's inevitable role in business building. It's a really interesting look at what is at the heart of the most effective entrepreneurs in the world. It tells some really good stories. It's an easy read. You don't have to have an MBA or anything like that to read it. It's a very approachable book, but a lot of the things that I've sort of been describing not too eloquently are contained in there, these ideas of what makes a good entrepreneur. And it certainly empowered me to think of myself as a good entrepreneur, that I had those traits as well.
Okay, one last question, and then I don't see anybody raising their hands. I can keep coming up with them. Part of the reason for me doing this course is to see artists more respected in society. And I figure if they're more powerful, more outspoken, making more money, contributing more to society, they're going to get more respect. I want to hear somebody say, hot damn, I have an artist who just moved in on my block. Aren't I lucky? Or, you know, there's a lawyer, an artist, and a doctor. Mm-hmm. You know, and it's great. We have a well-rounded block. You talked in the beginning about the disconnect between the number of Americans who value art and the number of Americans who value artists.
Yeah.
What do we need how do we affect society so that they appreciate artists more?
You know what's so funny is that what I've come to realize is that it's not even just the people you think it is. You know, it's not just the people who aren't going to the galleries or aren't going to the symphony. It's a lot of those people who do support the arts who still don't really go to artists when they need to go to artists. And so it's a two-way street. A good example is last year, the city of Chicago underwent the first cultural plan for the city in 25 years. And the Commissioner of Cultural Affairs, who's obviously a huge booster of the arts in Chicago, put together an advisory committee. And I was asked to be on this advisory committee to help write this cultural plan, you know, ostensibly for the next 25 years of Chicago. Huge undertaking. And I get to the first meeting and there's not one artist in the room. And I was really shocked, you know, and I said, where are all the artists? And she said, well, you're representing the artists. And I said, no, I'm not representing the artist. I'm a lawyer. I think like a lawyer. I'm never going to think like an artist. So this is like one of the most well-meaning people I can think of in terms of supporting artists in Chicago. And yet it didn't occur to her really to put practicing artists in that conversation. So for me, that is both the fault of those administrators and it's also the fault of the artists that they don't demand to be in those rooms. And so I think it has to go both ways. And I think that getting out there and letting these leadership people in leadership positions know that you are interested and that you want to be a supporter and not just show up when it's time to, you know, complain about something or why didn't I get this grant or why didn't I get this public art commission or whatever. Be part of the process with those people. That will change the process, you know, because artists will think about solutions. What I find so interesting is that artists will think about solutions to things that aren't necessarily like, oh, how do we get this mural under this bridge? Like an obvious thing, but like a solution to, you know, education or safety, you know, in schools, or they'll think of a solution to, you know, environmental issues in the city. Like I think they haven't been made privy to conversations that they should be, that are not even necessarily about their art practice, but just about thinking creatively. But that really has to come from artists as much as it has to come from leadership.
We did a webinar recently with Lincoln Schatz, who talked about how he advises corporations, and somebody asked how much he gets paid. And he said, I'm 50 years old. I want to get paid commensurate with what lawyers my age get paid. And I want an hourly fee that's equal to theirs. And I think that's the right mindset.
Yes.
You know,
won't be taken seriously if you do it for free. That's the problem too.
I know. I mean, ours is a weird society, and you know, we want to shape it, but we still need to acknowledge what drives it and how it functions.
I've been in fights about this with artists over the years. The residency that I have in Miami, for example, our board chair is now a very successful artist by the name of Daniel Arsham, who lives in New York. And for the first few years of that residency, we fought and fought and fought about whether the residency should be free. It's a year long. You get housing and all kinds of stuff for it. And I was adamant that I didn't want it to be free. It could be very inexpensive, but not free. And it was really because I find it infuriating that artists, for some reason, we've created this society of people who everybody sort of resents artists because they get so many things for free, and it creates this charitable relationship. Many of you may disagree with me, but I find it disempowering to the artist at the end of the day, because if you're not paying anything, then you have no agency to complain or to change it or to stand up against something that you're not in agreement with, even if it's $100 a month or $10 for this or whatever it is. I think there's no other profession in the world where that expectation is there. And I really believe, Paul, that that's connected to these other issues.
I want people to pay for this course. I want them to have some skin in the game. I want them to have, you know, a risk-reward experience. And, you know, and I want them to feel like they're getting way more than their money's worth, but I want them to be invested in themselves.
Well, because then it will relate to them saying, I have to charge for things too. Just like I have to pay for things, I have to charge for things. Ann Stoddard, I want to go to your question. You are unmuted. Go ahead.
I wanted to know if the Hatch Fund is associated with U.S. artists.
It's not anymore. It was started by us. It was a crowdsourcing site, like a Kickstarter, and we divested ourselves of it the year before I took over. It was just, you know, it became a huge thing, and it was not really our expertise to manage that. So it's now run by an organization called AIM, and that's why it's now called Hatch Fund. Under us, it was called USA Projects.
When was that spun off? I didn't realize that, so I'm glad for that clarification.
About a year and a half ago.
Okay, cool.
Thank you. Yes.
And then I wanted to hear, Theo, you had a question about the board, and hold on. And then Daniel, I'm coming to you after that. Theo, go ahead.
Okay, yes, hi. In relation to your discussion about artists being involved in the process of things, I was wondering, does USA have on their board of directors artists? And if they do, are they emerging artists or only established artists?
That's a great question, and I think it's one of the things I love about the organization. We do always have at least 3 artists on our board, but they are fellows, so they're alumni, and they are, you know, they have equal voting privileges and rights as the rest of the board. They don't give money like the rest of the board does, and in fact, we pay for all of their expenses because our board is from around the country, meets around the country. We cover all the expenses for those artists to get everywhere. And it's very important that and in fact, now we're going to have more than 3 artists because a couple of them were put into a different category of arts leader, and we're about to add a couple more artists. But maybe in the future with the Catalyst, you know, the smaller grant that we're going to give, maybe we'll have an emerging one. But I'm also starting for the first time an artist advisory committee, and that will be made up also of alumni. But for now, it's very alumni focused, because I feel like it's already quite a big group of people. But my hope is that over time, you know, it will be able to impact more, you know, more artists than just the fellows.
Thank you.
Thanks. Daniel, go ahead.
Hi, thanks for doing this, first of all. And I guess I just had a question, again, following up with this artist participation question about the artist as, you know, kind of an intellectual participant in society, and wondering about things like artist statements and so on. I mean, I came to art from a kind of complex background through physics and art history and poetry and philosophy and things. And so as a painter, you know, I'm wanting to speak about those things, and the work is loaded with that kind of stuff, but I'm often told to sort of dumb down the statements from various former dealer of mine and some other people. And I'm curious about that, about what your experience has been with that. you know, like the standard cliche is to let the art speak for itself and not to say too much. But I guess it's a dual part question, both a participant in a larger dialogue and also the advocate for one's own work in terms of your words.
I'm a sucker for a well-written artist statement because they're hard to come by. Most of the time, it's not the strength of most artists to write. And so I've done a lot of training around that, and I think it's very important. But my advice would be, much like I've had to do in the past, sometimes professionals have different versions of a resume, and maybe you want to think of different versions of the artist statement. Maybe there's the one that is a page long or longer, that is really your like sort of short dissertation of an artist statement. And then there's the one that has to be the extreme opposite of just a few lines, that is much more accessible and digestible by the Joe public, you know, because if you want your art to be widely seen and understood, then, you know, it's important that you be able to convey that. I once gave an award to an artist whose artist statement was a haiku. I mean, I just found that to be so crazy, but it worked so well for his work. But you can be experimental. Don't think you have to be married to one thing. I think the artist statement, this is my opinion, I think it should be something that evolves with your practice. And in your case, because you're also talking about science, you know, I was in Alaska in April at the Rasmussen Foundation. We went to this wonderful museum that's in Anchorage, a contemporary art museum in Anchorage, and they're doing a tremendous amount of work with science, as you can imagine, because of the oil fields and just the kind of, you know, exposure that Alaska has to all kinds of physics and science that's happening there. If you were in that environment, you should have a very complicated and complex artist statement. So it just depends on your audience.
And in terms of the grant, once you have your nominees and so on, I mean, I don't know. I mean, obviously it's about an individual artist's approach, but what kind of things are you most looking for from what the artists submit then for the grants?
We're looking for artists who are, you know, because we have a range of like classic, you know, really like from classical composers to people who are performance artists doing really very cutting edge stuff and new media. And so it's a whole range. And what we're looking for people to have a unique artistic vision. That's one of our tenets, is unique artistic vision and a fresh interpretation of something. So if you are a classical music composer, you need to be doing something new and fresh with that classical music. So we're looking for artists who aren't necessarily, you know, all doing super contemporary art necessarily, or installation work or things, but just have a really unique vision themselves of their practice.
What distinguishes USA artists from other artists?
Well, I think it's a good question. Right now, we're working very hard on messaging right now, because for a long time, the messaging that you'll find on our website, I found it problematic to say, oh, we have United States' finest artists. I found that to be kind of elitist sounding. And so we're getting rid of that language. And because who am I to say, you know, who the finest artists in the United States are? For me, what's interesting is the rigor of the process. So because we cast the net so wide across so many nominators in the field, and nominators are everybody from the obvious, you know, museum curator to collectors, but it's also a lot of artists are nominators. And so we get just a very vast array of nominations and see all kinds of work. And so for me, United States artists is so much about the diversity. And what's unique is that if you look on the history of our fellows, a lot of our fellows, the year that they were awarded, it was truly a catalyzing moment. A lot of them really took off and launched from there. In some cases, we gave awards to artists who were already fairly well known. But in some cases, like when Kara Walker won our award, she wasn't that well known. And a lot of people, and not that we were the reason they became so well known, but we have kind of a knack, this system, for whatever reason, of finding the artists who are, you know, discovering people, which is very exciting to us.
Okay.
We're not just giving, you know, to the person who just won the MacArthur or just won this. Like, it's a lot of people people have never heard about.
If someone won a MacArthur Genius Award, would that probably rule them out?
No, not at all. Okay. We don't look so much at that, though. We look predominantly at the work samples, and we look predominantly at the artist talking about what their work is about, what they would do with the award, and how how they would use that award to take greater risks. We're really interested. We know that over 90% of our winners have used the award to make new work. And of course, that can mean a lot of different things from, Catherine Opie, who's a very famous photographer who won our award. When she won it, she said she was able to buy a camera she had never been able to buy. Who would have thought, Kathy Opie couldn't buy whatever camera she wanted? So people use it for different things. But what's important is that either you take the time, but I think a lot of times for artists is they have the ability to take new risks in their work. For those of you who have dealers, sometimes dealers can pressure you to continue making the kind of work that sells well because they have, an interest in doing that. And so an award like this is money, but it's also prestige and confidence to tell you it's time for you to try something fresh and new. And that's kind of the thing we get excited about.
You're really right about galleries being constraining. I can tell
can be, yeah.
I know stories.
Yeah.
Thomason, I like your question. Go ahead. Barbara.
Hello.
Hi. Ask your question.
Oh, which one?
The most recent one about what's the mission statement of the United States Artists.
That's exactly what I want to know. What's the mission statement? What's the purpose of the organization?
It's twofold. One is through the direct and unencumbered award to give artists the freedom to create work and to take risks. And, that's what the meaning of the mission really is. And the other part is to educate the public on the importance of artists. And that really speaks to that figure that I stated earlier, the 2696, discrepancy that I still believe exists for many Americans anyway. I don't know about the rest of the world, but certainly in this country. So we haven't been as active on the second part of the mission, but that's something that I am committed to working more on. But it all really comes down, for us, it really boils down to the individual artists and getting them this unencumbered support, which is very unique.
Wonderful. Thank you. Vicki, I liked your question too. Hold on. I'm going to the other end of the alphabet. Go ahead, Vicki.
Yes, Caroline. I was wondering, with the time that an artist spends out of the studio, when they can be politically correct in meetings and boards and committees and activities, I find in my own personal career that it doesn't really advance my own position in my work. So what do you think about the balance between those activities?
For me, I have found that some artists, they want to remain isolated, and that's what works for them, and that's okay. But I find that artists who are able to come out a little bit and either socialize or engage with the public or engage with their peers, their work tends to get pushed to new boundaries. And I think that it's important to put yourself out there in that way and make yourself a little bit vulnerable to that. And it's not just joining boards or committees, but even doing a residency, for example, applying to a residency or doing getting a shared studio space with a few other artists and inviting people to come and do critiques of your work. Oftentimes artists don't get that kind of feedback once they've left the academic world, and for many people that's been many, many years. And so I think that for me, that kind of critique and conversation and dialogue is very important to any creative process. But I can't speak for every one of you, of course, but that balance to me is just about it's about experimentation. And if you're not getting it from one group of people, then move on and go find a different group of people. And you may find it in a group that you wouldn't expect to find it in, but to just challenge yourself.
Hold on, I had to mute Vicki because there was some feedback. Vicki, are you good with that?
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. All right, thank you. Wait a minute, there was another good question. Sam, let me unmute you. Go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, how important is it to, in your mind, for the artist to know who their audience is?
You guys are all visual artists, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
like my projects change quite a bit. So, right now in my community, I'm just getting known as this kind of, wow, she's kind of out there, like it's, I live in a small place. Mm-hmm. And, everyone says, oh, you should be in New York, you should be in New York. And so I'm just sort of curious, and I was asked the other day, do you know who your audience is? And I've been to 2 art fairs, and, generally I get a response from everyone. Is that my audience? So and how do I drive my work into these specific channels to what the project is about? Like I seem to be doing a lot of different things in order to gain traction.
Yeah. I think, I do believe that strategy is important to success if you want success in a marketplace. Marketplaces have rules, economies have rules. And so if you want to participate in the marketplace, then the answer is yes, you need to know your audience, because there's artwork that does very well at the, Winter Park art fair, that those artists are making a killing, some of those people who are doing, the sort of traditional landscapes and selling them at art fairs. And then, but if you're a person who wants to end up in the Frieze Fair in New York, don't be caught dead selling something at the Winter Park Art Festival. So in that respect, you need to have a strategy as an artist and know ultimately, are you trying to sell? Are you trying to be seen by a certain gallery? Are you trying to be covered by a certain review or a certain magazine? Then you do need to have a strategy. And the tricky thing with art, of course, is that there are so many ways to that end goal. It's not like in law practice, where every lawyer follows the same kind of trajectory in a law firm. It's so different for artists, but it sounds like you are trying to sort of participate in the art marketplace. And if that's the case, then I think you do need to be strategic about, if you want to be in group shows, then there's a lot of group shows nowadays that you can apply. You can apply to be in shows all over the country. And if you want to just be seen, you can probably start to get into a lot of those. And that can be a way into a lot of new audience building. But learning about your audience is also, it sounds like you have no problem talking about your work and talking with people. And I think that's a great thing. I think you should do that as much as possible and getting feedback about your work, but just be ready to hear what people think about it.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. Jerry, go ahead.
Thank you for being on the show. And I'm really happy that you're trying to get people to respect artists. And when I lecture once in a while, I always tell this story about a friend of mine who's an artist who gets phone calls occasionally from people to say, I'm running late today. Could you pick up my laundry? Could you do this? I can't get there. Could you run errands for me? Like the artist's time is like worth nothing if they're just sitting in their studio having coffee and then they run errands for other people.
Yeah.
And I often, also when people come to my studio, they say, oh, you must have so much fun. Like, I'm just.
Yeah. I know. That's so true.
And the fact that you're trying to change that image, I think, is really terrific.
Thank you. And just, how hard it is. I think that there's just so little understanding of how hard the work is that you guys do. And that when you finally see the work on the wall, how much went into that, how much from such a wide breadth of influence went into that. I think that education is something most people don't have. And it's a shame because that's where the value comes from. How many people look at a Rothko who have no idea what that is and say, I could do that. It happens all the time.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Okay. Anne, hold on, let me scroll up here. Go ahead, Anne.
Okay, hi. I'm about to start doing a huge project which involves a lot of skills I don't have, and I would like to form an advisory group. And I'm just wondering how to do that, if you have any ideas about how to do that. Should they be paid? And what can I ask of people? I would like to be able to ask them for feedback or referrals or help or.
Yeah. Are you talking about like new skills that you don't have, like practical skills? Or are you talking about more like critical feedback?
I think both.
Both? I'm a huge believer 100%. Like I said earlier, I can't ask that artists pay for things if I'm not willing to pay them for things. So I really believe in paying people, and it can be very nominal. I'm sure that the people who you are asking to be part of this know that you're doing this as an artist, and what your end goal is, and that I don't know how successful you are personally, but that it should be within reason of what you're able to provide. But I think paying for people's time, what's important is that, what the earlier gentleman just said, it's sending the signal that you value that person's time. And unfortunately, in the world we live in, that equals money, and even if it's a stipend, and you call it a stipend, but you're very transparent about it. And so that, I don't know if you have a web presence at all, if you have a website, or if you have something like that. But if you start an advisory committee, another thing, I've been raising money for a long time for many organizations. People like to get credit for when they give something. So maybe on your website or your web presence, you give thanks to those people, and you sort of call out your advisory committee, and you make it clear that this is a paid group of people, of experts who've helped you get to this level or to learn how to do this project. And so it's kind of a combination of both money and acknowledgement. I think both of those things are very important when it comes to asking for people's help and advice.
What about things like fundraising?
Well, how do you mean, asking them to give funds?
Well, no. What I really would like is I would like advice in how to form a strategy to do what I need.
How to fundraise?
Well, I know some things about it, but I feel like this project is so big that I can't think about it, and that I need help to think about it.
So you're talking about, in particular, someone who can help you learn how to fundraise for your project.
Or
right?
giving a direction.
Giving you direction?
Now, I already did set up a trade with a friend of mine who is a skilled fundraiser, but I'm having a hard time getting her to.
You can do a trade. That's a great idea. That's exactly what I would do. But I would be, very specific about what you're expecting, and say, okay, this is, I don't know what your trade is, but let's say it's a painting. This is a painting. To me, this painting is valued at $2,000. Your time, you charge $100 an hour for development services. So let's make this agreement, and this is what this is worth, and let's make it very formalized. I mean, that would be my number one thing, because especially when they're friends of yours, and maybe Paul has talked about this in the past, but those are usually the people for whom deals like this go the most south. You have to be as specific as possible. I think bartering can be a fabulous thing, but you have to put it out on the table, what your expectations are of what's going to be delivered and by when. That's why I believe in paying people, because then you have a deadline. If people are volunteering for you, you become the least important job they have.
And Harley asked about this earlier. I plan on doing a specific webinar on this subject before the 20th of September. I haven't scheduled it, but I want to invite everybody who's taken this course to participate. So we will cover this in the next 3 weeks.
Oh, the specific. Okay, good.
The specific, and we'll go into depth, and we'll look at different models, and we'll go into it. I hope that's soon enough for you. I think as a last question, I want to go to Sarah Lynch's question, and then we will wrap it up. Sarah, hold on. I need to unmute you. Proceed. Go ahead. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for talking to us. So just the comment about, people coming to your studio and saying, oh, you have so much fun. I get that a lot personally, because my work is pretty crazy. And do you have any advice on how to answer that's appropriate? Because my initial reaction is not a very nice one, and I know I can't do that, so then I just end up biting my tongue. So it's I'd like to give them better words to say, but I don't quite know what.
Okay, well, are these people usually there just to look at your work for the first time, or are they there, formally to do a critique? Obviously not. They wouldn't insult you that way.
No. It's open studios that's open to the public, and so it's an opportunity for me to educate the general public, but I tend to get sort of tongue-tied and be like, thanks for visiting.
Describe your work a little bit to me. Is it a 2D,
Well, I guess that it's more complicated for me because I do I have very different bodies of work that's like functional sculptural ceramics, so like mugs shaped like cats, and they are kind of cutesy, but they're also a little creepy and weird. And then I have paintings that are mixed media that are very like obsessive, but also bright and colorful. So, I get it's so fun, but it's also like, how do you get fun work to also be taken seriously?
Do you do much writing about your work?
I do, yeah. I'm actually fairly good at writing.
Because, I don't know if you've invested in something like that, but having like a brochure or like something that's a written piece that people can take with them, or that you can sort of hand them when they come in, and that they can sort of read, much like you go to a museum and you would see the first wall that you walk into the museum is oftentimes a whole wall of text giving you a great introduction to what you're about to see, depending on what the context is. And I think that's very useful for people who aren't familiar with you or your work, and sets the tone for what you want them to see. Because, yeah, you could be making Hello Kitty mugs, but if they're these really derisive Hello Kitty mugs that are about, mass destruction, or about like something much larger that somebody wouldn't know, you can't just expect people to understand that either, or be insulted because they don't. And so, giving them a tool that explains your process and your intent, I think, is extremely useful, and making it so it's something they can't avoid seeing. Use your creativity to do that. Maybe it's something much more interesting than a brochure that I wouldn't think of because I'm not an artist. So something that is kind of in their face that makes them think about it, so that before they come to you, they've realized that a lot of intentionality has gone into this artwork.
Yeah. Okay. I've never thought of like formalizing it quite so much, because it's like it's where I work every day. So
you should remember that it takes guts for people to walk into artist studios, and it's often a scary thing for them too, because artists are so mysterious to non-artists. And so people go to these open studios because they're curious. And a lot of times it's like they may say something totally inappropriate because they're nervous, or they don't really understand, or they don't know what the right question is. I've done a lot of training of people who are interested in collecting art, kind of cultivating new collectors. And it's a big barrier for people. It's scary for them. So trying to have a little compassion for that. Not that I'm saying you're not compassionate, but just a little bit of like, okay, how can I make this a little bit easier for a non-artist to enter this kind of strange world and not just see kitschy stuff, that is what the lay person would see.
I think what Carolina's saying, combined with Nestor's comment about a for your information card or something that you read, that you can hand them, that says, "I'd love your question. Read this and let's talk in a few minutes." We'll give them, something probably pretty damn simple. We'll give them some insight about what your bigger picture is, and hopefully initiate a more substantive discussion.
Thank you.
It's been great. Carolina, I think this has been really wonderful. I really totally respect what you are up to, the challenges that's in front of you, and your ability to surpass that and do something exceptional. You are on our radar, and I
really invite all of you to follow us on Facebook, because it's a great way to learn more about us, and if we come to a city near you, then to engage with us.
Let me unmute everybody. So we have cacophony. Carolina, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great night. Thank you.